Hey guys, welcome to the Produce Common Sense podcast. This is episode 18, and we always have special people, but we have really, really special people this time. Caitlin Thornton, the Apple. What are you on TikTok?
I'm the Apple girl.
The Apple girl from TikTok. I mean, I know her as Caitlin instead of the Apple girl, but the rest of you are going to have to go look this girl up on TikTok because she's killing it on there. And her and I are kind of similar in the way that we produce content. No, her content's way better, actually. We create the same type of content, and we like to try and educate the consumer. Those of you that are out there that are regular people eating fruit and vegetables, we want you to understand what it takes and what we're doing every day. I want you to learn about apples because you've had to learn way too much about onions when it comes to me. I want you to understand the same types of processes that you've learned with onions about apples. The steps. So Caitlin, here's like the primer for you. I want you to do, when we get to this, I want you to do steps 1 through no more than 15 steps. Okay. Steps from planting to packing, what those steps are. That's what we're going to get to here in just a second so that people can understand what it really takes, the regions that we grow in, how long apples can store for, all of those types of things. First of all, why did you start creating content?
Well, okay, honestly, Shay, you were a huge part of this because before we even knew who each other were, I knew who you were, and your videos would pop up on my TikTok. And this is when I was just I was 17, 18, just kind of posting whatever was on my camera roll, kind of just having fun with it. I had maybe 30,000 followers, and I started seeing more and more content creators involved with agriculture popping up. And I really liked your approach to it of talking directly to the consumer and being like, this is how what is happening with supply chain is going to affect you guys. This is how it affects us as farmers, and really bringing in that full picture of what everything, was coming down to and currently happening in the world. And so I honestly found a lot of inspiration from your videos. So, don't get too big of a head, but
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But
that's cool.
so
that's cool. I mean,
that inspired me a lot. And then just, growing up in the fruit industry and experiencing a lot of the heartache at that time, when I really started posting about farming stuff, we were almost losing our farm. We were going through some deep we were in special assets. So we had banks breathing down our necks. We were scrambling to find lending, and COVID had just started. And so no one could come out to our farm. And I feel like that's a huge key in getting lending is, bankers and lenders coming out to see the land because, when you look at numbers, it doesn't always make sense, but it's seeing that farmer really knows their land. They're doing what's best, the best that they can with that land. And so taking all these.
Hold on, I'm gonna cut you off there because this is something people are gonna ask, or I'm gonna ask, and I kind of know the answer, but okay, so you're 3rd generation or 4th? I can't remember.
I'm a 4th generation. Yeah.
4th generation. Okay, so I thought 4th generation farmers, everything would be paid for. You'd have no financial risk. Everything would be, easy peasy. So not getting into specifics, but why do farmers, what is it about farming that requires us to even have to borrow money?
Well, because we don't get paid for our crop until the next year or a year after.
Maybe even 2 years, right? I mean, you're going to put these apples in storage for, we'll talk about that here in a second, but for a really long time, right? So it's a cash flow problem.
Yeah, and we're really putting it in the hands of, that's who we choose, which warehouse we're going to take it to, which sales and marketing desk we're going to go through, and really have to have a lot of faith in those people are going to take care of us, and they're going to try to get the most dollars for our fruit, right? And so that's a lot of.
There's something else you talked about there that a lot of people won't understand. So you had to pick who's going to pack, right? Because you're a grower, right? Because from our setting, we're a grower, packer, shipper, marketer. For our onions, we do everything. But there's a lot of people, onions included, not just apples and other tree fruit, where you're just the grower. So you have to trust other people to do a lot of the work and give you a fair return. So that's part of your thought process of figuring out where to actually take your apples.
Oh, hugely. And it takes a lot of communication. I mean, this is anything in fresh produce, I feel is just there's a lot of people involved and a lot of moving parts. And so you have to make sure that every cylinder is firing. It has to be a well-oiled machine because everyone has to be doing their parts or everyone's going to suffer from one person not doing their job, right? And so it starts with us growing the fruit to the best of our ability. And then we have to pick and communicate with which warehouse, whether they need Granny Smith or this other warehouse needs Bartlett's, and where do we take our fruit to, and who's going to get us the best possible returns, who's going to also run our fruit and make sure that they're not dinging us for too many of these little, like whether it's cosmetic issues or whatnot, making sure that we're getting that premium pack and getting the most money per bin.
So you can't just like harvest it and walk away. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely not.
You can, right? But if you did, it would be detrimental to your profitability, probably.
Yeah, and even a huge thing is like the warehouse will call us the night before they run our fruit. So they're pulling however many bins out of storage to fill an order for a retailer. And one of the biggest ways that we can help ourselves out is having someone, whether it's my dad, whether it's me, whether it's our foreman, actually drive down, and it's about an hour and a half to the warehouse that we take, one of the warehouses that we take fruit to, and actually watch that fruit run and make sure that they're like the people overseeing how they're packing it, how they're grading this fruit, making sure that they're doing a job and they're being fair to us. Because it's really easy, and I get it because I'm going into a marketing degree, right? You want to have like the best possible fruit to sell, and it's really easy to sell fruit that is spotless and it doesn't have any sort of deficiencies, and you can be like, hey, really I got the best fruit. And then
it's a really hard balance. When my uncles or my cousins or the growing side of our operation and they come here, I encourage them to come, right? Because I want them to see what we're throwing away, what we're culling, but I also want them to see what we're culling so they can improve their practices. Like it makes me think of the video you posted on TikTok where you're trimming the stems, like that. Okay, and this is where I got to get to, so that those of you that don't know anything about the produce industry and don't know anything about apples, this is what's cool to me. There's stuff that I learned. Like I think a lot of people think that farmers, like we just know everything about farming. Like we don't know anything about anything else, but we know everything. Like if I'm a farmer, I know about apple farming. Like I had someone ask me yesterday about what was happening with the lettuce, with the iceberg lettuce. I had someone ask me on iceberg lettuce. I think we'll make it. I had someone ask me on iceberg lettuce, like what's happening. I happen to know what's going on because I'm kind of in the middle of the produce industry, but I'm like, people just expect you to know, right? I don't know anything about apples. So that's my first qualifier. I know not nothing. Hopefully I know a little bit more than like the regular, businessman who has never worked in agriculture, but I barely know more than that. So Caitlin, take us through like, okay, how many years, like before your first harvest, when do you have to plant? When can you do your first harvest? Like what's the steps from planting all the way to shipping?
Okay, so we're about 60% pears, 40% apples, but I'm going to talk about apples because that's my thing. So okay. The apple industry has changed quite a bit, honestly, in the last 50 years or so because there are so many new varieties, and I think that's a huge change. When my great-grandpa was farming, it was literally Red Delicious, Golden Delicious, and maybe one other, maybe Macintosh, right? Not a whole lot of diversity there. You could just focus on growing those 3 varieties. But now you have to think about, I've got this amount of land. How am I going to divvy this up so I have the most profitable crops? So before we plant anything, we have to make sure that we're getting the right variety because that's a several year commitment. And
okay, so because you've got, let's pick me a new variety you want, because give me a Cosmic Crisp or a
Sugar Bee apple.
Okay, Sugar Bee. Okay, so a Sugar Bee versus a Red Delicious. How much more valuable to a farm is a Sugar Bee versus a Red Delicious in today's world? Like you can give it on a percentage or $1 per acre or however you want to do it. Is it worth 3 times as much, a quarter as much?
It's got to be at least double.
At least twice as much, which is a really big deal. Okay.
Yeah. So what we did with the sugar beet apple, for example, Dad, and this is like before I really got into it, I kind of got into the fruit industry as we planted the sugar beet apple. So kind of this love story begins, right? So Dad decided to plant this maybe 15 acres of sugar beet apple on the people that he trusted that said, this is an awesome apple, you should plant this. He had never even tried the apple. He just trusted that these people were going to carry through the marketing, carry through the sales. And so he was like, all right. And so we actually, the first sugar beets that we had, we actually grafted, because grafting it, you can go either planting.
Okay, what's grafting though? This is farming 101. So what's grafting?
Yeah. So you can either plant the trees, just the whole tree, just stereotypical, or you can graft. Grafting is you're cutting down all of the trees that you have already planted down to their trunk. And then you're literally gluing sticks of the new variety on this trunk, and it actually grows into that new variety. In the most,
so you use the old root mass, the original root mass.
Yep.
And that's where you start. Okay. So what is the time difference? What's the time difference to production, like the first harvest, grafting versus planting? Do you know that?
You'll
Ballpark?
start. Yeah. So with trees that you plant, you can, with a dwarf rootstock, which is, that's just a whole different thing. And that'll take maybe 3 years to start producing, versus a regular tree, just like anyone who is planting a tree in their backyard, that's going to be about 7 or 8 years before you start getting full production of fruit. So that's a whole commitment in itself, right?
Talk about cash flow and needing to borrow money, right? I mean, seriously, like 7 years. So you have this capital outlay for 7 years. So we grow asparagus, and our asparagus is about 4 years, and that's bad enough. But 7 years that's crazy. That's
right?
Crazy. No, yeah.
I know. Well, and that's like, you'll get a few apples, but that's still full production where you're getting the actual production that you were wanting, initially when you planted that tree. But with grafting, it's a lot sooner. You're going to start to see fruits after probably 2 years. First year is always kind of like you'll get maybe 1 or 2. But then that second, third, and fourth and fifth year is when you really get that full production. A major benefit, though, of just grafting over is that you don't have to worry about the input costs of, getting a whole irrigation system set up and stuff. You're just repurposing all of that. So it's a lot more, we hear the buzzword a lot lately, sustainable. It's a lot more sustainable. So we go with that a lot of times now, because we have planted most of our ground, but like earlier years when my dad was acquiring land, there was a lot of breaking new ground and having to figure out different tree spacings, and because there's just so many different variables that go into at least tree fruit. Step number 3 is just, that yearly.
Okay, so maintaining the crop until you get to harvest it the first time. Does that mean trellising too, by the way? Do you trellis?
Yeah, so one of our biggest things is we don't like to cut corners. Some people don't usually do trellising, but like I talked about, dwarf rootstocks, which are just essentially weaker, smaller trees. You have to support them with trellis. So putting
But you have to support these trees because the varieties are a little bit like they just don't have the physical strength. They'll break on you with the fruit on them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Or just dwarf rootstock means there's a smaller ball of roots that is supporting it. Trees support themselves by having roots that spread out.
Okay, so the trees will just fall over, basically. I mean, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm learning. And can you imagine, those of you that are listening again, okay, all of these things, you have to hold these. So when we're talking about trellising, there's cables that run from one part of the field, all the way the whole length of the field with posts every so many feet. And I thought it was so you could harvest more easily. I didn't realize it was to help hold the trees up. See, I'm learning.
Yeah. And then I could really go into this all, because I don't know if you really want to include this or not, but a big part of that is you can either do a straight trellis, which that's what we've had to do a lot lately with the current economy. But there's also the V trellis, where you have poles crossing at the ends. And then and then you tie limbs to all of those wires because in each tree there's a central leader, and that's basically what stimulates the tree to grow more fruit.
I mean, you're training the tree.
Tree training, yes. That's what we call it. Tree
That's
training.
Cool.
I know, it is. And I'm still learning about it all because there's something new that comes up every year that I'm like, wait, what? And it's pretty cool. And so, yes. And then we move into the typical, how we start our year off. You know, you spend the winter kind of maintaining and fixing all of your equipment that's kind of gotten broken down over the typical growing season. And also a lot of meetings is what we're going into right now, because we're constantly trying to come up with the newer and better ideas and making sure everyone's on the same page, because you want consistency across the industry as far as how things are grown. We don't want someone to be growing crappy fruit and it become a representation of all of us. So constant communication during the winter. Then you move into...
Is there an apple commission there? There's an apple commission, right? A Washington apple commission?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So that means an apple commission is usually a group of growers. There's an onion commission. So there's certain standards that we have to meet and certain ways we have to do things, because one bad apple, pun intended, one bad apple can ruin the whole barrel, to keep the pun going. But I mean, really, they can mess you up. Someone that sends out sub quality product gets to the market, or something that doesn't, I guess, a poor variety. I don't know how that applies with you guys, but I mean, but generally it comes back to quality. Poor quality hitting the shelves can hurt everyone.
Exactly. And I mean, you think about, again, the sugar bee apple. We've had handbooks given to us because we want to make sure all the growers are putting these same essential input costs, as far as, you know, certain supplements that we have for the trees, certain ways that we are, certain picking times and stuff, because we want to have a consistent eating experience. Because you don't want a consumer, imagine you go into a store and you expect this certain flavor from an apple. Well, some grower didn't do things the way that they normally would or should do. And so you get an apple that's a little bit premature. And so it doesn't have the same flavor profile. And that makes a consumer not trust that apple variety. So,
which complicates it even more. What's the size of the grow? Like, what's the average size of a grower in your commission in the Washington area? Do you know what that number is?
Like acreage wise?
Yeah, acreage wise.
We've got a lot of smaller growers in our region, so I'd say about 100 acres.
100 acres. Okay.
Yeah, 100.
But then that product, to be clear to everyone, that product gets consolidated at a packing house where, so not a 100-acre farmer doesn't necessarily have anywhere to pack their product, or they don't pack and market their own product, right? They're gonna take it. So we went from trellising to meetings, and then what? Like when it's, because we skipped the harvest part, although we were digressing. For my knowledge, not for everyone else's necessarily. So you go trellising, and then that you're going to do trellises, and then 3 or 4 years later, you're going to actually be able to, and you're going to continue to prune and maintain that crop during that 5 to 7 year period.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if a block is not producing or is. You've still got to make sure that tree is healthy. You got to make sure that your water lines are working right. You got to make sure there's a lot of upkeep, even as far as mowing each of those rows, just to make sure things don't get ahead of you and you're staying on top of things. So when that fruit starts to come into production, you've already got a routine, and that block is used to you coming in and putting these inputs in, and so on and so forth.
So for asparagus, we actually have to harvest for small increments of time to train the root mass. Do you have to go in and thin fruit, like before you get to full production, before that first harvest, we'll call it year 7? Do you have to go in and are you pruning anything before that, or are you thinning fruit, I guess is what I call? Are you taking any small apples off to keep the tree trying to produce? Or do you actually just kind of let them, as far as growing and producing, you let them do whatever they're doing until the first harvest? Or is there no fruit until year 7?
There will be progressively a little bit of fruit. So the first year it starts to produce fruit, there'll be a few apples on a tree. but not nearly the amount of volume that you would expect at full production. And each year it'll ramp up a little bit until it gets to full production. But with younger trees, there's still a lot of inconsistencies as far as like different things that pop up in fruit. It's just kind of like teenagers going through an awkward puberty phase. The fruit goes through the same thing because it doesn't have a like set in stone kind of system. The tree is growing. There's all sorts of things out of whack, and so you're not getting the controlled fruit that you normally would at about that 7-year mark, right?
Okay.
So yes.
So you get 7-year mark. You do the first harvest, and then what happens? What does that mean? You harvest, and then what happens?
You start out the year, you are pruning. You are making sure that tree is growing in the right direction. It has enough air. It has enough light. And then leaves start to come on, blooms start to come on. Well, in Washington, especially where we grow some dynamite apples, it is cooler, which grows dynamite apples, but there's that chunk of time, and we call it frost control season. So we have these huge, what we call wind machines, and they're basically a propeller. We have to get up in the middle of the night and turn those on to protect the blooms, because if those blooms, before they even start to turn into a fruit, if they freeze, there's not going to be any fruit. And so how that all works is hot air rises, and you're essentially stirring up that air in a small, circumference of an area, and you are bringing that hot air down. So it brings up the temperature around those blooms a couple degrees, and a couple degrees makes a difference with fruit. And so you have to stay vigilant for about a month. Everyone's exhausted, everyone's cranky, but then also at the same time, you've got bees out there that you have to bring in to pollinate all of these blossoms, because if they're not pollinated, they're not going to turn into fruit. And so already you have X amount of input costs, and they haven't even turned into fruit yet. Protecting that bloom from cold, and you put costs into bringing in bees, and then also tractor drivers and pruning and all of these different things.
Bringing in bees. Hold on, you said something else. We do the same thing. Bringing in bees. Like you just said that, like, oh, we bring in bees. But I'm pretty sure that most people are like, have no idea that you have to bring bees in.
Yeah. So
why? So you have to bring the bees in to pollinate, obviously.
Yeah. In order.
And you did that, and now after you pay for the bees to come, you might still freeze the blooms.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. So you paid for that. Okay. And then you paid to put all these big fans in the field to stir the air around, which is where you were just a second ago. Stirs the air around, and it helps prevent frost. But does it stop a frost? Is it guaranteed?
No.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. I knew the answer to that, but I mean that. So you can still do all this work. You grew this crop for 7 years. It's your first harvest. You're super excited. You've got the bees out there. The bloom is on. It smells good. It looks gorgeous. And now there's a frost warning, and you could lose the entire crop.
Yeah, pretty much. We sound crazy when you put it like that.
Yeah, well, I think farmers are kind of crazy. I mean, we don't appreciate. Here's one of my complaints about our industry. Okay, and this can be on the record. I don't know where this will go, but one of my biggest complaints about ourselves in the industry is we're so used to taking such extraordinary risks that we don't even think about, like anyone else. You're like, hey, why don't you try and build your house for 7 years? Okay, and when you're ready to move in, there's like, I don't know what one out of however many years, like what's the percentage likelihood of a total freeze? Like 1 out of 10, 1 out of 7, like how often do you lose a crop?
Well, I mean, there's some blocks that just get froze out. Like you're going to have a percentage of your crop freeze every year pretty much, unless it's a really warm year.
Okay, so I built a house, I worked on it for 7 years, and there's just one of the bedrooms is going to be worthless, and I'm just going to have to board up the door and not even use it. Right? I mean, that's pretty much it's the same investment. So we don't even, we do that. We take these crazy risks, and then we don't even financially, we'll do this for single digit margins and just say, I love what I do.
I know.
And that's where we people are really lucky that we don't charge a lot more. That farmers are very passionate and consider what they do to be a privilege, and an honor, and we don't charge what Wall Street would charge to do what we do.
I know. That's so true.
I mean, it's great. Okay, so but I want to talk about you skipped one. Well, that was cherries though, the helicopters. So do they fly helicopters over the, like, you don't do that? I mean, okay, you have the wind machines?
Yeah, wind machines.
Okay, you have the wind machines to protect the bloom. Do they ever use a helicopter for like a similar format, or is that only for some tree fruit, getting water off a tree fruit?
We will use airplanes or helicopters, but not for that, but to sometimes release pollen. If we feel like if we don't see a lot of like blossoms on the tree and we want to make sure every single one of those are pollinated, we're going to like essentially crop dust it with pollen.
But the airplanes actually are releasing pollen like they would when they're spraying.
Yeah.
So what's our next step?
So from that point, all during summer, you're thinning. So you're going through, if trees have too many apples now you have to take those off to, first of all, ensure that your tree is not too stressed trying to distribute nutrients to each and every one of these apples. You also, the more apples you remove, the bigger the apples that are remaining are going to be better quality. And mind you, all of the pruning and thinning is done by hand, unless there is a certain chemical thinning earlier on in the year, but it's kind of a gamble. You kind of have to look at how much bloom you have and say, yeah, we'll thin it from that point. Okay, but back to the main point. You get closer to harvest. You got to make sure that your labor is secure. You got to make sure that you have enough people. And then you move into harvest. You're working with a lot of field men. So they come in and they pressure test your fruit. So they literally
pressure test your fruit.
Yeah. So it's
you say that like we all know what that means. What's that mean?
It's testing the firmness of your fruit. If you have too soft a fruit, warehouses will reject it because they feel like it's not going to hold up in storage.
So you grew the whole crop, you made it through the freeze, you made it through the pruning, you made it all the way to harvest time, and now some guy comes and sticks a probe on it and says, hey, it's too soft. Now what?
Well, this is where relationships come in handy. This is why you can't just burn bridges in agriculture, because everyone is intertwined for generations. And so you end up working with a warehouse because no one wants to see food waste, especially farmers that have literally taken care of this fruit all the way up until this point. And so you work with the warehouse. Hey, can we get my fruit in? And we do what we call early pools. So they're going to move our fruit. Instead of having it sit in storage and get softer, they're just going to move that fruit into stores earlier.
So you can't just like claim an insurance claim on it and get paid for it anyway?
No. You can only get insurance claims if it's a natural disaster or something.
Okay. All right. Same thing, by the way, for onions. Everyone's always like, well, you're just going to claim an insurance claim. I talk about problems that we have, and they're like, well, I'm like, hey, we don't have water, or we had a wind, even on a windstorm, because for us, we don't do multi-barrel. Some people do, but it just doesn't. In many crops, it's not worth it. Or it's just cost prohibitive. So yeah, you don't get to just like, hey, insurance man, my fruit's soft. Come pay me for it. Like they don't.
That would be like
that way, right?
That would be like running out of fuel and then complaining to your insurance that your engine got a little bit screwed up because of running out of fuel. It's like,
okay, they don't care. It doesn't work.
They're like, well, that's
right. I mean, I would suspect it being that way, but I wanted to clarify because so often, maybe in some of your videos you've seen commentary like that. Well, like your hailstorm, for example, is you. I mean, I guess it depends on what type of insurance you carry. Was there anything you could do with that? So that is a natural disaster, right? Mm-hmm. A hailstorm. Could you, if the hailstorm came in and you lost the whole crop, in that case, maybe you get some insurance money, and would it pay you as much as if you harvested and sold the crop?
No, but it would help cover those input costs for sure.
Okay.
So that's what we try to do is, again, problem solving. We did get hailed quite a bit, actually, the worst hail Dad's seen in 30 years of farming this year. And that was scary, but you also have to look at the bigger picture. This year, apples are short and pears are fairly short too. And so these marketing and sales desks have already made obligations to retailers to keep their shelves stocked. So they want as much fruit as they can, even if it's a little bit quote unquote lower quality. They're going to still be more open to taking that fruit and doing something with it versus other years where you've got a ton of fruit all over the industry.
Okay, so let me bring you back. They pressure test. So the guy comes in, he pressure tests, and then your fruit's good. Then what?
Well, and then you do a lot of sampling in each block, and you actually cut open apples and you put iodine on them, and it shows the starch levels of your fruit. Because as apples ripen, it goes from starch and it turns to sugar. So you got to have the right amount of starch and the right amount of sugar, because you don't want it to be completely starch, even though that'll hold up in storage the longest. It's going to taste like crap. And then also you're looking at color in your crops, because while color doesn't always mean it's going to be the best tasting fruit, that's what consumers want. That's what retailers want, is good colored fruit. And so what we do a lot of times is we throw down in each row shiny foil that we call mylar, or sometimes white rolls, and it literally reflects the sunlight up into the trees and helps color up that fruit. And so you're just basically...
Does that change the flavor profile at all, or is that purely for aesthetic purposes?
It depends on the variety, because like for Red Delicious, they're automatically just going to turn red and going to taste the same regardless. Like the sunlight, it's just a genetic thing. With it just depends on the genetic makeup of the apple, honestly.
Okay. Okay. But largely, I mean, the majority of it, I'm assuming, is more for aesthetic, like for the quality, for the look of that apple versus making it taste better.
Yeah, I mean, we live in America. It's all about looks. Okay.
Okay. All right. So you put the mylar down, and then but the mylar's probably, are we in that order? They'll come out and pressure test prior to, or are you doing that during the middle of the growing season?
They'll pressure test and iodine, like starch level test, multiple times before
really
we pull the trigger. And so we have meetings with our fieldmen, and there's fieldmen from each warehouse, because each warehouse has certain specs that they're looking at.
Okay, I know what a fieldman is, but what is a fieldman?
A fieldman is someone who got a specific degree in agriculture, and there's more of the sciencey side of it all. So they understand the bugs, and they understand all of like the
plant physiology, the genetics, how the starches, how and when they're going to turn to sugar. Like they're the consultants, right? If I'm going to use layman terms, they're the consultants for these packing facilities that are going to come and tell you, give you their opinion and guide you in a direction that they think is beneficial for the farmer and for the packer.
Exactly. And so us as farmers, we're not always the one looking at all of these different things. We are managers. So we're the overseers and making sure that the money is being spent properly and we're making the right decisions for the overall quality of fruit and the tree's health.
Okay.
But yes, it's a consultant. A fieldman is a consultant. I like that. So yes, a lot of back and forth on that. And finally we get to a point where we're going to pick the fruit. We also have to, in the meantime, go down and bring back all these empty bins. So we have empty bins on supply, so these guys can pick the fruit into these empty bins, fill them up, and then take them to the warehouse again.
Okay, so you're going to hand harvest all the fruit, you're going to put them in bins, you're going to cart them to the warehouse, and then they're packed right now? I mean, they go straight from the bin to the packaging, to the grocery store, or what?
No, then they sit in storage until you get orders in, and then it moves on to the sales and marketing desk corresponding with the warehouse. And sometimes they are the same thing. It's so funny because last night, one of my good friends, he wanted to understand the fruit industry, and I literally drew it out for him. I was like, growers grow fruit, and then there's warehouses, but some warehouses are their own thing. Some of them have their another marketing desk, or sometimes they work with a separate marketing desk. And ended up with just a bunch of arrows all over the place.
I haven't done a podcast or a video on it, but I always hear the term either a packer shipper or a grower packer shipper or a grower packer shipper marketer or blah, blah, blah. And it took me, so I'm 42 years old. I'm in this industry my whole life. And it really took until about last year for me to get to a point where I'm like, okay, there's people who just grow. There's people who don't grow, but pay someone to grow. And those are the growers, right? And then there's and I go actually one step further. I usually say farmer, grower, packer, shipper. That's what I've started doing, farmer, right? Because I can be just the money guy and I can pay the farmer to grow for me, and he makes me a grower because I'm paying someone to grow. So you have a farmer, grower, and then the farmer takes the stuff to the packer, and the packer may be a shipper or they may not, which is another confusing, anyway, I don't need to go into that, but it really is. And it's taken me all this time to figure out how I can define that in a way that I understand it. So my sales team comes to me, I'm like, this is what they mean, but I don't know why it has to be that confusing, but it can be very, very, very confusing. So what's the oldest apple that you've ever eaten? Let me start there. What's the oldest apple that you've ever eaten? Out of storage.
Probably over a year old.
Over a year old. Okay.
Yeah.
And how in the world do you have an apple was it good?
Yeah.
Okay. How do I have an apple? How do you have an apple that's good after a year, over a year? What had to be done to keep that apple good?
So fruit in general to ripen releases a gas called ethylene. And so what they do in warehouses with technology and stuff is they will take out that ethylene and I guess bring up or down CO2 levels or something. I don't understand that whole part.
Yeah, so they'll usually have an oxygen. So they want to remove the oxygen from the atmosphere, right? I know that much, right? Because they'll call it controlled atmosphere or a CA storage. Which we don't do in onions, by the way, because we don't have any ethylene release, so we don't have to worry about it. But it's similar. We're going to put our buildings, our onions or potatoes are very similar to apple storages, except for we need a lot more air, and we don't have to worry about the ethylene at all. But where we pack our asparagus, they also have CA storages, controlled atmosphere storages, and if they're going to go in there, they have to put an oxygen mask on so that they can, go check the fruit. If they can even go in, I don't even know if they can, because they always just put a box of fruit by the window and they look through the window so they can see what's happening. I don't know if you've seen that done before.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't spend too much time at the warehouse on that. I watch the fruit packing line, but I don't go into the storage rooms.
Okay. So the oldest apple you've eaten is a year old. And what is what's the coolest thing for you about the apple industry?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think one of the coolest things about the fruit industry is, from a farmer's point of view, is that you can grow a product and then eat it instantly. There's a lot of grain farmers and stuff. It has to be processed for them to actually experience the fruits of their labor.
The fruits of their labor, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but then also it's just wild how many families the fruit industry and the apple industry supports. Okay. Think about all the jobs that we supply. Yes, it's a pain that we don't have some sort of combine for ourselves, an automatic fruit picker, but all of these families have a source of income because of what we do as farmers. And then it translates into truck drivers who transport our fruit, anyone who works in a warehouse, anyone who works in the sales and marketing desk. And then it moves into produce managers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely agriculture in general, but the apple industry. And is Washington, in your district right there, is that the largest apple production region for sure in the country? Is it in the world? Do you know that?
Yeah.
So what percentage of the U.S. supply comes from right there in your backyard? Do you know?
I have no idea. I'd say at least 80%.
Okay.
I think it's in the 90s, honestly, because I know like Pennsylvania and New York and
Michigan has some decent apples, I think, too.
like just not the sheer amount that we like. You'll go up the belt that is my valley, and it's just orchards. When
I fly over, it's unbelievable, especially when the mylar is in the field and you look down and it, like, depending on where the sun is, it'll blind you almost. It's crazy. But the sheer scale at which everything happens, and that happens. You said your grandfather, did he start right there 4 generations ago? Or did he start somewhere else growing apples and then ended up in Washington? Because, most of those projects started in like the 60s. So was he there before that?
No, my great-grandpa moved into Washington, was down a little south of me in a town called Cashmere, where actually applets and cotlets came and originated, that candy, and then moved up the valley. But started in West Virginia, did not grow any fruit, came out, and also had cattle and apples. And then my grandpa, which I don't know if you would consider this skipping a generation, because he would still take care of the orchards, but he also was a World War II combat medic and then became a doctor. But his piece was coming down and taking care of some of the orchards, and that's how my dad fell in love with it. And my dad really rebuilt the family farm. My parents started with 23 acres because they had to rebuild. This is, again, with family farming, there's family disputes that happen and they can't settle it, whether people are greedy, want all of the land for themselves, all the money for themselves, or people decide to give up and walk away, type of thing. So
with that being said, what recommendation? Okay, so you're coming back to your family farm for sure. You're going to go back to the orchard. Have you decided that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you've decided that. What advice can you give someone in high school, right, that's not yet in college, finishing your college career, or your college education, and you're coming back for sure to your family's farming operation? What advice do you have for people that are in high school, maybe FFA students, maybe completely outside of agriculture? What advice can you give them when they look forward? What should they be doing? What shouldn't they be doing?
That aren't involved with agriculture?
Yeah, anybody. Like, what I guess the way I look at it is, what advice can you give to someone that was you 5 years ago and they're thinking about being part of a family business? This doesn't have to be agriculture, but a part of a family business. What's important to know? What mistakes maybe have you possibly made, or what things do you wish you did differently, if anything?
I am very thankful that I had a realization at a fairly young age, 15, 16, that this is something that's cool. This is something that's unique. 2% of the nation is farmers, right? But even in a family business, that's really unique, and I have a lot of opportunity there. Be involved. Just find someone who is actually willing to be a mentor to you, or kind of force them to be. Dad said that I was a pest to him because I'd be like, Dad, where are you going? I'm going to ride around with you, and learn and be open to learning and just be curious. And then also realize you're in a really unique place as a young person, because the people are a lot more forgiving of you and appreciate your curiosity. And so try to lean on that. It's people want to help you succeed if you even had the slightest inkling of a direction you want to go in. people are going to help you get to that point.
Okay.
So be aware of that and seize it.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, it's anytime anyone is trying to figure out what to do for a career, I always tell everyone that asks me, like, being a farmer was number 2 for me. I was going to be a pilot, but candidly, my family was like, "Hey, you don't want to be a pilot. You don't want to do that," and they have their reasons for it.
Yes.
But I find it rare. Like, if you're one of those people who knows exactly what you want to do, don't let anything discourage you, because that's a huge blessing to know at 14, 15, 16, 17, heck, 23, like, to get to a point where to have a perspective at a young age where you know exactly what you want to do. That's huge. It's so huge. So run with that and take advantage of that blessing, because it'll really, for me, I think it's really important.
Oh, absolutely. Passion is just one of those things. You're going to have bad days, you're going to have good days, but if you have passion, it's going to get you through anything, really, because it's truly what you want to do, and figure out what makes your heart happy and keep going back to that and keep building on that. Don't just chase money. Don't just chase, titles or whatever. Go back to what makes your heart happy, because that's what life is about to me, is that just finding that joy in those simple things oftentimes. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking this time to be on here. Caitlin, where can people find you? What are your handles, and what should people be looking for when they find you online?
I've got all sorts of content, daily activities, and educational. I have TikTok, and that is Katy, Katy J Thornton, THORNTON, and then 02. I've got Instagram, Caitlin Jill Thornton, and then I even LinkedIn, Caitlin Thornton.
Okay, yeah, and I except for LinkedIn, Instagram, I think I'm following you on both places. I encourage everyone that wants to learn a little bit more about agriculture in general and see someone who is very passionate about what they do, even though it's not onions, you want to go follow.
Hey, maybe I'll get there one day.
She's really done a phenomenal job, and I hope that everyone has learned something new today about apples, something that they can take away and appreciate just a little bit more, where their food comes from, what it takes. Think again about that house that you worked on for 7 years, and when it's time to move in, you have to board up 2 rooms because something happened. We're taking risks as farmers all the time, and it's just part of our culture. We don't really know any better, but hopefully that gives you just an inkling more appreciation of our efforts and of our passion and of what we do. If you liked what you've seen in today's podcast, your comments, especially your reviews, are critically important. We're trying to reach more people. We're trying to share more about these types of things. If you've enjoyed it, if you've liked it, you know what to do. Go hit that like button and give us a review so we can find more people. We'll see you next time.